With that,
Oops, sorry. Not mean for that to talk over you.
no worries, no worries. So good. Well, here we go. Excellent. Let's see. All right, and I want to begin tonight. I saw Marla's out there, Marla Estes, who some of you know. Marla sent me this wonderful quote last week, and I said, you know, this is the perfect quote to introduce this topic. From Lawrence J. Peter, he writes, "Some problems are so complex that you have to be highly intelligent and well informed just to be undecided about them." Some topics are just that difficult. There's so much that you have to take in. There is so many perspectives that you really have to try and hear, that it takes a lot of work. And I would say when we talk about race relations in America, that's one of those topics. And more than anything else, I think it's a topic where we need some intellectual humility and warm-heartedness to approach. And I really want to set the stage because we're going to be talking about race relations over a couple of months now. And I want to kind of set the stage for that to get us in the right kind of mood, that we have open minds, open hearts, and that we're prepared to listen, particularly to people who may see this issue differently. And the other thing is, this is the kind of topic that can be very volatile and can get people's emotions going in a big way. So I always want to remind people, and those of you who've been to our talks and what have you, I see a few of you out there, they're used to this. I always like to remind people of a basic fact of life. And that's that our minds react to attacks on our beliefs the same way as threats to our physical well-being. We have Stone Age minds, all that neurobiology that evolved to help us survive in the Pleistocene. That really comes to bear nowadays when we start talking about issues, when we start getting into things that we believe, and when we push up against perspectives that don't completely align with ours. We can feel that often, even in our bodies. There is this concept of cognitive dissonance, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And of course, if you've taken Lisa's class, the brain on politics, she gets into all of that. And again, I want to bring that to the forefront because this is a topic that can be volatile. And when we get into talking about it, you know, we're gonna need to really be mindful of the fact that we're going to react to things a certain kind of way, and that's okay. As Marla likes to say, you know, nobody's got a knife to your throat. Just breathe, go through it. Be aware that there are going to be some things that might be uncomfortable in what you read and in what you hear. Just want to encourage you, stay with it, work through it. There may be things that upset you. Just stay with it, work through it, try and get through to the end, so that you can really take in particularly that perspective that isn't the perspective that you share. Because, you know, racism is a very volatile kind of topic. And I want to frame this because we're going to be doing a couple of books and a couple of films looking at race relations. I want to frame this with a question, which I think is kind of at the heart of what this debate is about today. And that is, why is it that here we are, you know, 55, almost 60 years past the culmination of the civil rights movement? Why is it in America that racial disparities still exist? Why is it? And more importantly, perhaps, how do we change that? What can we do to alleviate racial disparities? And there are different perspectives on how to do that. And we're going to be opening those perspectives up in a couple of books that we're going to be looking at this month and next. The first, of course, Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, which we're going to look at tonight. And then next month, Jason Riley's False Black Power. And in doing that, there's a sense in which we're going to be looking at kind of two different Black views. And it's not to say that there are just two views or that everybody is in one camp or the other, but I think there are a lot of scholars who would say that when you look at the history of race relations in America, from the perspective of Black writers and people writing on the topic, there does seem to be kind of two different strains of thinking. And we're going to open that up as we, in the next couple of months through these two books. And so tonight, Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And if you want to learn more about Ibram Kendi, he's got a wonderful website that has all of his books. You can get videos there. And if you download the primer on the back, there's a link to it, and you can learn more about his book there. But I want to begin by asking a question. What is racism? What do we mean by racism? I just want you to think about that just for a second. You know, no responses. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about this in our conversation. But just think in your own mind, what do you think racism is at the outset here? Well, I'm going to give you a standard dictionary definition of racism. This is from the American Heritage Dictionary. Racism, the belief that race accounts for differences in human character or ability, and that a particular race is superior to others. That's kind of a standard dictionary definition of what we mean by race. A racist essentializes, that is, a racist assigns racialized group traits to an individual. That's what a racist is. A racist is somebody who says, Black people are like this. White people are like this. Asian people are like this. They assign certain group traits to individuals. That is kind of the essence of what racism is, as we've tended to define it over the course of the past several decades and what have you. But even Kendi, in what's been regarded as a groundbreaking book, he has a different way of looking at racism. Here's Kendi's definition of racism. He says racism is a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequities. To Kendi, racism is structural. It's systemic in nature. It's not simply the dictionary definition that I just gave you. And that's something important to know as we begin looking at his book. And in defining this way, Kendi is really channeling some of the Black power influence of his own growing up. One of the things about this book, if you've read bits of it now, you'll know it's very biographical. But this idea of structural racism really goes back to Stokely Carmichael in the late 1960s. And I see some of you are probably old enough to remember Stokely Carmichael and some of the other leaders of what was called the Black Power movement. And Carmichael wrote, institutional racism originates in the operation of established and respected forces in the society. It's this idea of structural racism, systemic racism that Kendi brings into his own perspective. He says racism, again, is a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequities. Again, it's this idea of institutional racism. And so then what is racial inequity then? Well, according to Kendi, racial inequity is when two or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing. It's this idea of there's a disparity. You hear the term disparity a lot when we talk about race relations. They're not, these groups, when you see groups that aren't on approximately the equal footing is the language that he used. And you can see this in a lot of the data. Here's here's one data point that we can look at that points to this. This is some data about poverty and poverty based on race and ethnicity from the U.S. Census, where we see that In 2014, about just under 15% of the general population lived in poverty in America. About 10% of all white people, about 12% of all Asian people, about a little over 23% of all Hispanic people, about 26% of all African American people, and a little over 28% of Native Americans and Alaska Natives. Again, this is an example of racial inequity. People that are not standing on approximately equal footing. And this is the concern that Kendi is going to be getting at in his book, this problem of racial inequity. So what is anti-racism then? Well, to Kendi, anti-racism is a marriage of anti-racist policies and anti-racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial equity. That is, getting these groups on approximately equal footing. That's the job of equity. How do we bring these groups to a place of approximate equal footing? That's the goal of what's called equity. And equity, of course, is a term that's used a lot today. Some of you may have seen this graph. This is kind of a typical graph that you see for people who are trying to convey the idea of equity. You can see the difference here between equality, as we understand it as Americans, and equity. They are two very different kinds of things. And here's a definition of equity. Equity is about putting particular segments of society in the position that they would have been in, but for some undeserved misfortune. It's an equal outcome kind of approach. We need to get these folks back up to a level of approximate equal footing. And equity is a way to do that. People who advocate for equity will often say it's giving people what they need to succeed. It's bringing people up to the starting line where they have a fair chance and what have you. That's the idea of equity, as opposed to equality, as we tend to think of it. Well, what is equality? Equality is more about impartial processes that guarantee equal treatment rather than equal results or prospects. It's this idea, you'll hear this term, equal opportunity, as opposed to equal outcome. And if you hear those terms, this is broadly speaking what they're referring to, two different ways of looking at it. Equal opportunity is more treating people the same, whereas the equal outcome approach is giving people who are lacking, people who are marginalized in particular, what they need to be able to succeed, to bring them up to a place with everyone else. And I know that the topic of equity and equality is much deeper than this, and I am going to get into this. If anybody is interested, and pardon the shameless plug, but I am going to be doing a more in-depth Zoom conversation about this at the end of the month. If you're interested, let me know and I'll give you the details about it. Because equity has really become a very important topic in America today. And it's a very important topic to Kendi, and it really is, I would say at least, kind of the centerpiece of his book. So what is an anti-racist then? Well, an anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. And what is an anti-racist policy? Well, any measure that produces or sustains equity between racial groups. Again, bringing people up to approximate equal footing, and particularly focused on marginalized people who are kind of at the bottom of the societal mix, so to speak. And so an anti-racist policy is intended to advance equity. And one example of that, and I just ran into this the other day, here in Oregon, of course, where we have a vaccination rollout, and the governor has a committee that she's appointed to try and figure out, well, if we have a limited amount of vaccine, who are the people that are most in need of getting it so that we can prioritize it. And the first folks, of course, are first-line responders, people in the medical field, educators and folks like that. But the committee just announced that because the coronavirus is affecting particularly marginalized groups, seem to be disproportionately affected by the virus, that we need to, in the interests of equity, as they've explained it, in the interests of equity, we need to make sure that those people are attended to, are given a priority, again, to try and level to get people on an equal footing, so to speak. So that's an example of a kind of an anti-racist policy that I think Kendi would expound on, to try and help the inequities that we see in our society. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of these kinds of programs. We're going to be seeing much more attention on equity now that we have a president who has dedicated himself to equity. This is from a last week, as some of you may know, Susan Rice, who she was a potential vice president pick, as I remember it. And so she's a pretty powerful and influential person, and she's the one that they've chosen to really head up the Biden administration's efforts to advance racial equity. And just to give you a sense of how important this issue is, this is what she said last week at her press conference as she rolled out the president's plan. She says, "The president has committed the whole of our government to advancing racial justice and equity. On day one, the president signed an executive order directing an unprecedented whole of government initiative embedding racial equity programs across federal policy, programs, and institutions." So the Biden administration is very concerned about equity. They're very concerned, particularly about marginalized groups who need help. They need additional help, and equity is the way that the government is going to be looking at the various programs to try and help. So expect to see a lot more emphasis on equity moving forward. But as you might imagine, not everyone agrees with this approach. Not everyone agrees with Kendi. And one example of that, in fact, is Jason Riley. And we'll be looking at his book next month to give you a different perspective. It's not that Riley isn't concerned about inequities or isn't concerned about disparities. He is. But Riley and others who are of a more conservative mind have a different approach. And I just want to give you a little bit of a sample of that so that you can compare the two as we read and understand Kendi. Riley says, "The sober truth is that the most important civil rights battles were fought and won over 4 decades ago. The Black underclass continues to face many challenges, but they have to do with values and habits, not oppression from a manifestly unjust society." He says Black people need more personal empowerment and less politics. And there are a lot of Black folks and other folks who agree with Riley, and a couple of notable present day proponents of this. So one is Coleman Hughes. Some of you may have seen Coleman Hughes. He's in the media quite a bit. Another is Chloe Valdery, who is actively working. And again, they represent a kind of a different approach, pursuing the same goal, but a different way. And both of them are, I would say, are channeling people like Tom Sowell, who some of you know, who have been talking about this for a very long time. So again, there are two different perspectives. I think it's fair to say, broadly speaking, they're kind of pursuing the same goal, which is how do we deal with these disparities that still exist, but they have different ways of doing it. With Ibram Kendi, it's through his anti-racism approach. And it's an important difference. And I want to pull, here's an idea that I pulled out to show this from Kendi's book. He says unequal or disparate outcomes between racial groups must be due to racist policies and ideas. You see, he has a disagreement with these folks. He says, no, it has to be due to racist policies and ideas. Appealing to cultural or behavioral differences is racist in Kendi's mind. He says it's victim blaming, and masks the true cause of all racial inequity. Racist ideas and policies. And that's Kendi's perspective. And as you read the book, he's going to make lots of arguments drawing on history and data and all kinds of other factors to make this case. He says the focus is on eliminating disparities through anti-racist policies and ideas. And one of those ideas, and when you download the primer, I've actually included this as a third page. Excuse me. One of these anti-racist policies or ideas is to pass an anti-racist constitutional amendment that would basically make it unconstitutional, that would make racial inequities unconstitutional. Again, I'll let you read that. But again, these are the kinds of things that Kendi is advocating in a way to help promote equity. A couple of other notes. One is in presenting his case, Kendi defends affirmative action, which is a topic that I think is still getting a lot of debate. I think California just had an initiative on this, so it's an issue that is still being discussed. He says the defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. People say, yes, but affirmative action, you're discriminating against certain groups of people in favor of other groups of people. Well, Kendi says, again, the defining question is whether that discrimination is creating equity or inequity. Is it helping? Is it helping to level the playing field or not? He says if discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. But if it's discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist discrimination. He writes, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. And he makes a very, very spirited argument in defense of affirmative action and really challenges us to think about, well, maybe this is really something we need to support in terms of policies, in terms of government. So again, worth considering. And the last thing, and this may be the most controversial thing I would say that Kendi says in the book, and it'll be interesting as when we come back together and we talk, it's going to be really interesting to get everybody's feedback on this one. He says there are no non-racists. There is no such thing as a non-racist, only racists and anti-racists. There is no such thing as a non-racist idea, only racist ideas and anti-racist ideas. The heartbeat of racism is denial. What an anti-racist does is confess, not deny. Again, a very powerful argument, something to think about. So, in kind of closing this out, that's a kind of an idea, gives you, I'm hoping to just give you, that's taken right from Kendi, kind of where he's going with this. And as he writes the book, he has a wonderful talent for bringing his life experiences and what he's learned. We see him evolve in his thinking about race as he talks about his life. But I've got some questions. These are some questions that we've put together to kind of frame particularly our discussion at the end of the month. Are racial disparities only caused by discrimination? Are there other important causes that contribute? Does culture and the social environment also play a role? Should we discriminate against some groups in order to level the playing field, to be equitable in the sense that Kendi argues for? Should people be considered racists for not supporting efforts to redistribute wealth and power? Should we amend the Constitution to ban racial inequity in the manner Kendi proposes? And lastly, again, what I think is a very interesting question, can someone be non-racist? Or is that just a form of denial? These are some questions, and I should say there are more questions that need to be asked. And if you've got some questions that you want to be sure to get into the mix when we come back and discuss, do send them to me. When you download the primer, my email's on there. Just click that. You can send me an email. But these are some of the questions that we might want to ask ourselves as we look at the book. And again, I want to encourage you, take in what Kendi is saying. Even the things that may sound, at first glance, you may not find yourself agreeing with them. Stick in there with it. Listen to his arguments. Try and see things from his perspective as you read the book. Because again, this is a very powerful book. Some people believe this is one of the most important books on race that's been written in recent years. So again, it really behooves you to take his arguments in, what he's saying in, and try and understand what he's writing about. So again, that's kind of an overview of the book. I want to encourage you, download the primer. Some of the slides that I showed you, they're on the primer, and there's some additional reading on the back. I want to encourage you to do that. And we're going to meet back here in, I guess that's 3 weeks from now, on February the 24th, 5 o'clock, same time. We'll be for 2 hours. We're going to have a conversation. Hopefully you all have read the book, or most of the book. Maybe some of you have had some conversations with other people about the book. What we'll do is we'll come together again as a large group, and then we'll break down into smaller groups, and we'll have a larger conversation about the book. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out of the share mode, and we'll take some questions, and we'll talk about people who want to stick after. But before I do that, so I don't have to go into the share mode, and some of you may want to leave a little early, I want to show you, I want to give you a real quick sampling of some of the stuff that we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks for Crossing Party Lines. And then we'll go out into the gallery mode and we'll take questions. So tomorrow night, we're going to be doing a conversation about universal basic income. Have COVID relief packages made introducing universal basic income inevitable? And can we draw any conclusions? So that's tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. That'll be a conversation. Monday, February the 8th, we've got a movie night, Divided We Fall, which is a wonderful film depicting ordinary citizens who come together to wrestle with issues dividing our nation. Again, these are people on various places on the political spectrum that are coming together to have a conversation, much like what we do at Crossing Party Lines. That's Monday night at 8. We'll watch the movie together, and then we'll have a discussion. Our film club has a little bit of a different format. Our film club, and this is a film that goes along with our reading of Kendi and Jason Riley, the movie The Best of Enemies for the Film Club. A wonderful story. Came out, I think, last year before last. A true story of the relationship between an outspoken civil rights activist and a local Ku Klux Klan leader in 1971. That's Saturday, February 13th. And again, with the film club, you need to watch the movie offline yourself or with your friends and what have you, and then come to discuss. And if you go to the meetup site and register, it'll give you that information. And again, I want just a quick plug. If those of you who are interested in a deeper discussion on equity and equality, I'll be doing a Zoom exchange at the end of the month, and you can talk to me about that. And the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to turn it over for questions, just to remind everybody that Crossing Party Lines is a nonprofit organization. We've got a lot of things that we want to do. Want to encourage you, if you can, to give a buck. Just give a buck if that's all you. I actually gave a buck last week just because I wanted to give a buck. So if you can go online, we'd appreciate any donations that you have. And so there you go. That's what I wanted to present, again, as a way to kind of frame not only Kendi's book, but also the book next month. And the last thing I'll say is, if you are somebody who is a conservative-minded person, if you find yourself more on the right, I want to really encourage you to read Ibram Kendi and take it in. If you're somebody who tends to be a little more progressive than on the left, I want to encourage you to stay with it and read Jason Riley's book so that we get different points of view, because my own personal view is I think there's a lot of common ground between these two gentlemen. And in particular, both of them are very concerned about saving and empowering the lives of people who find themselves marginalized in American society today. So want to encourage you to practice viewpoint diversity and to engage. So with that, we'll take some questions. I don't want to get into the book so much. I know many of you are probably anxious to do that. But if you've got some questions of a more practical nature, or maybe something, go ahead and raise your hand. Wendy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I missed, are we supposed to complete the book by 2 weeks from now, or just get a certain way into it?
My advice would be read as much as you can. I found it a really easy book to read because there's a lot of story and biography in the book. So I think it's not a difficult book. I would just say read as much as you can. And I think the main ideas are in the front of the book. So if you get most of the way through it, I think you'll get a good sample of what, but other people may have other perspectives.
Is there a later meeting, or is that the only meeting in 2 weeks on the book?
Yeah, there'll be the 3 weeks from tonight, we'll have a 2-hour conversation. I will say though that we are going to be doing a CPL standard conversation on racial discrimination and disparity. I may not have framed the conversation just right there, but we're going to have a conversation that kind of goes beyond just the book to look at this issue of disparity in a broad way. So there'll be some more conversations. And also the film night, the film club will be talking about these kinds of issues because it's going to come up as we look at the best of enemies. Anybody else? Another question? Butch, go ahead, Butch. Unmute, Butch.
You repeat where we can get these things to download?
Yeah, if you go to crossingpartylines.com /antiracist.pdf. Antiracist.pdf.
Thank you.
Or Butch, send me an email. Send me an email anyway, Butch. Good to hear from you.
What's your email?
Rob at crossingpartylines.com.
Easy enough. Thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, we are trying to put together a community, a membership kind of portal that will allow folks in the book club and the film club and doing the conversations to have some dialogue that is in a contained environment. It's not Facebook where you're going to have people that are not vetted come in, but hopefully we'll get that going pretty soon. Any other questions? Has anybody started to read the book?
I did.
Good. Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of interest in this book right now, and so you'll probably find other people that are reading it because, like I said, it's a book that's having a lot of impact. Anybody else? Question? Butch, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm listening to it on audiobooks, and it's really difficult because there seems to be quite a bit of repetition, and I can't follow sometimes a line of thought very well.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I find certain books work really well as audiobooks, others don't. And I don't know about that. Maybe others have an experience like that. I encourage people to read this book. I mean, my copy, I've read it twice and then I've dabbled with it. And my copy is just riddled with notes and I use my little colored tabs to find things. There's notes all over. That's how I like to read. Again, this is a book in my mind that requires some thought. You got to think. You got to spend some time with it. Especially, I would say, if you find yourself disagreeing with it, stay with it. Try. Make sure you understand what he is saying, particularly if you find yourself disagreeing with it. Make sure that you're hearing, what he says. And again, the same thing with Jason Riley, which is a little easier book to read next month around. You're going to hear a different perspective. Stay with it, particularly if you find yourself disagreeing with Jason Riley. Try and stay with his argument so that you really hear and understand what he's saying. Anybody else? Greg, is that a question, Greg, or is that a?
Yes, Rob, I noticed you have two authors, for books to read who are both Black, are you planning on any books by whites, such as maybe Kevin McDonald or Heather McDonald?
You mean about race?
Yes, about race.
No, not really. There's some recommended books on the primer, and one I believe is a white author. But again, the criteria that I had in selecting the book was to find the best books that really got to what I think are kind of two different approaches. And that was kind of the criteria. And yeah, I think it's important that we hear from Black voices, on this particular issue. So anybody else? Question? Gwen, go ahead, Gwen.
First of all, I have to say, very good choice in choosing this book to coincide with Black History Month.
Yes.
And secondly, my question is about the Divided We Fall movie or whatever. Where can I watch this movie? Because I don't think I might have work that day, so I might not be able to show up for the movie night.
Well, we're going to show it. I think if you Google "Divided We Fall,"
Yeah, because the most common result I've gotten for Divided We Fall is a drama film from 2000, and that's certainly not it. This is a documentary that aired on PBS in 2020.
Yeah, Gwen, why don't you send me an email?
Actually, I just found it.
Oh, good.
It's on Rocky Mountain PBS.
There you go.
You guys, the film is called Divided We Fall, Unity Without Tragedy. Type that into your Google search or whatever search engine you use.
And again, we will, on Monday night, we're going to watch that together. So it's in, unlike the film club where we watch online, with the movie nights, we'll sit and we'll watch it together and then we'll have a discussion. But yeah, if you can't make it, be sure and see it. It's a great film. Another hand out there I'm trying to see. Michelette? Unmute. Unmute.
Yeah, I am. I had to find the button. So sorry. I think it's really important that we start hearing a lot more from the people who are directly affected by this. Instead of, I see racism as this is the core. We're a white nation and everybody else is outside that core and they don't count as much. And I think everybody counts. Like in Jamaica, you have a tremendous mixture of races. They didn't give up. It's not a melting pot because they didn't give up their identity, but they're part of the society. And I think we need to hear from everybody, especially the people who have been affected. And I first ran into this when I read Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, and I was just astounded because I grew up in a Black neighborhood, went to a Black school. I was a really odd minority. And I was really picked on because I was so different. And I learned a lot from that when Malcolm Gladwell said that Black people were often racist against themselves and presented evidence of it. It blew me out of the water because I never thought of these people I went to school with, these friends I was familiar with, as disliking themselves or seeing themselves as less, which indeed quite a few of them did and do. And especially in Los Angeles, inner city LA, where I grew up, I had Chicago because they wanted me in a medical program that I wasn't able to join, but it felt very different. And I asked people who were Black why it was so different and why I was always that white chick. And to them, I was just a person. And I got such different answers. But to deny people a voice is kind of to deny reality. You're kind of saying, no, it's just the white core, and you people aren't part of our society, and you don't matter. And there was an initial cause. You cannot imprison someone, kidnap them, put them with people who can't speak their language, forbid them from marrying, forbid them from having a culture, and expect that 4 generations from now, that's going to be okay. It's not. If you merely rape a woman, it's not going to be okay in a generation or two. It's going to have repercussions. And until we can admit this, we're going to have problems.
Well, Michelle, I'm hoping that you're going to come in 3 weeks and we're going to talk about that very thing. And the one thing you
I
said
have
that,
such an opinion. I'm so
yeah,
sorry if I'm offending anyone.
no,
if
no,
I'm
no,
being
no,
wrong,
you're great.
but I'm
Because again, one of the things that we really want to do, particularly crossing party lines, is we want to make sure that all the voices get heard and that we're not limiting ourselves to just certain kinds of voices. And again, as we do these books, as we do these films, that's going to be a real guiding principle for us, is making sure that we not just hear or have different perspectives in the mix, but that we're listening and we're understanding where different people are coming from. Because I know Kendi talks to some of the very things that you allude to there. Anybody else? And again, questions. We're going to have a good conversation about this in about 3 weeks. And again, I want to encourage you. I gave you some questions on the primer. Those are just my questions that I've kind of gleaned. If you've got some other questions as you read, if you think there are things that we really as a group we need to talk about that aren't part of my question mix, send them to me so we make sure we hit on them. Go ahead, Anita, go ahead.
Hi. I got the book because my daughter told me that I was racist and I didn't think I was. And then once I got the book, well, actually, she gave me the book. I asked her, I said, well, give me some books because I think we're not looking at this the same way. So she gave me that book and I've been reading it. And of course, the first part of it says that if somebody says something racist or does something and you don't say anything, then you're a racist at that time. And I went, I'd never thought of that.
Gave you some food for thought, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And so
Yeah.
I
would
thought,
agree.
so
Yeah.
I've been reading and I think I'm about halfway through because I have to read it and then think about it and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Well, that's good. And again, that's really the goal. The goal of the book club is food for thought. And again, there are going to be people that are going to read it and they're going to have a different reaction than you have. Let's find out why they react one way, somebody else reacts another way, and let's get all that, get all that discussion out in the
I
open.
never thought of myself as racist because I don't think of people that way, and I don't act that way. But I guess by not doing anything about it, I'm kind of condoning it. So yeah, this is all new for me, but I'm also going to get that other book and read that other one too.
Good. Yeah, definitely read both. Definitely read both.
And I want to go to that equity thing.
Yeah.
So do I just need to email you and tell you that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's you, Anita.
Actually, you can just go to Save America Live and the link's right there. Any other questions? And again, I know that there's a lot of discussion that we're going to have about this topic. So, keep those questions. Some of you may want to journal. Again, I not only journal, but like I said, I destroy my books by writing notes. And this is one of the most marked up books that I have. So it's a book that really is worth engaging with. Any other questions that people have about the book? Kevin in North Carolina. Go ahead, Kevin.
Just a quick question on your books. Are you going to do any historical books to get a perspective from the past to current?
On race?
On race.
No, but I think you're right on the money. It gets back to that opening quote. I think if you really want to understand racism, and you obviously know this, you have to really dig into the history of it. So the answer is no, although on the primer, one of my favorite books is Tom Sowell's book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And I don't think there is anybody who has done a better job distilling the history of slavery than Tom Sowell. And he has a real insight, I believe, on culture. And however, again, you may not always accept our particular writer's conclusions, but in terms of just the raw history, Sowell does a really great job of kind of mastering the facts. So that would be a book that I would recommend, but you're absolutely right. History is really, really important, in this mix.
I was thinking farther back, like Booker T's Up from Slavery.
Yeah, totally.
And with Sowell's I've read the Redneck book, but his Discrimination Disparities is a better counter to the current
Yes.
book that you have listed.
Well, we're gonna when we do Jason Riley's book, we'll be using Soule's book, Discrimination and Disparities, in that context. I would say that Jason Riley's book is a kind of a popularization of some of the kinds of things that Tom Sowell gets into, you know, in the disparities and discrimination. So yeah, I think you kind of nailed it there. Peter, go ahead. Peter, you got a question?
Yeah. So you were telling us, yeah, let's read this book with an open mind. You might agree with it or disagree. And then the other book, also, you might agree with it or disagree with it. But okay, here's where I do this trick of phrasing my statement in the form of a question. So shouldn't we, even if we agree with the book, shouldn't we think about, is this person actually making a good argument? Like, yeah, I might agree with this author, but do I want to repeat this author's arguments to somebody else? Or is there a better way of phrasing this argument? Or is there a flaw with his argument, even though I agree with the conclusion? That thing is especially important.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And again, last month we talked about critical thinking, and I would say the role of critical thinking, I would say, is to be skeptical, particularly about a book that you like. You know, is this really, you know, it's how I see the world that I need to be most critical of. In my mind, that's that's what critical thinking is kind of all about. So yeah, you're right. All those questions I think are really important. You know, and again, that was one of the reasons why I laid out these questions about Kendi's book, because the questions kind of challenge some of what he says, you know, just so that we can think better about it and really understand what his arguments are and what, you know, what he's trying to say. And I think he would come out the better for it if we kind of approach it that way, I would say. Yeah, good point, Peter. Yeah, good. Anybody else want to weigh in there? Have a comment or question? Again, I don't want to get into a big discussion about it, because that's what we're going to do in a couple of weeks. But I want to encourage you all to download the primer, do the reading. If you want to stick around, if people are interested, we'll set up a room. If you want to have a meet with other people and talk about the book, we can do that. Depends on who wants to stick around. But if you read Kendi's book, I want to really encourage you to also read Jason Riley's book, and also attend the films. We're going to be doing not just Best of Enemies, but in March, we're going to be doing a brand new film that's just come out called One Night in Miami. Anybody seen One Night in Miami? It's a fictional account of what would happen if Malcolm X and Sam Cooke and Jim Brown, and who's the fourth person? I'm losing the fourth person in the mix. Came together at the height of the civil rights movement and had a discussion.
Muhammad Ali.
Yes, that's right. How could you miss the greatest, Muhammad Ali? What would happen if those four people who had very different approaches, and so what would happen if they got together and had to spend a night together talking about race relations in America at the end of the 60s? So it's a fictional account. Well, what I think is wonderful is the director and the writer, I think, have done a great job of trying to show that actually there's a lot of diversity among Black people, a lot of diversity on this issue. And I think that's really important, that we not kind of pigeonhole any person in one kind of way of looking at the world as another. And so we're going to be looking at One Night in Miami. And I think that too is going to give a lot of fuel to talk about race from, again, a broad perspective, to kind of take your frame and, you know, increase the aperture on your frame so that you zoom out and you can see things from a larger perspective.
So is One Night in Miami going to be like another movie night, or is it part of the film club? Or?
It's going to be part of the film club, so you'll have to watch it on your own. And again, we'll be sending out information about that at the beginning of March.
Okay, so yeah, it would obviously have to be next month.
Yeah. Any other questions? Is anybody interested in sticking around? It's 6 o'clock, so technically we're done. Is anybody interested in sticking around, and you're all good? I'm not seeing a lot of hands, so I'm going to assume that I'm going to stay on for a little bit if anybody has any more questions. But again, want to encourage you, read the book, download the primer, see you back here in 3 weeks, prepared to have a warm and engaging talk about how to be an anti-racist. So thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. And again, any questions you have, comments,